This video is sponsored by Squarespace. The color science sucks, the cameras are boring to use, they have no soul, and they don't look very nice next to an overpriced flat white in a trendy Shoreditch coffee shop. These are some of the things that I've been told about Sony before jumping over, and in this particular video I'm going to talk about the A7RV, which is my main photo and video camera. This is not a review. I've only had this for 2 months, which in my opinion is not enough time to give it a proper review, especially considering how complicated this is. It's also worth mentioning that Sony has not bought me out. I paid for this camera with my own money from a generic UK retailer. Also, I am not a brand person, as in my identity is not tied to a particular brand of camera that I use. I'm very pragmatic and objective when it comes to camera gear, so all opinions are from that viewpoint. Let's start with some things that I don't like about the camera. There aren't that many, and I'm very much nitpicking here. Also, keep in mind, I've not had it for long enough to experience any issues that long-term users have highlighted, such as dust in the sensor. I have not had it personally, so yeah, keep that in mind. The first negative that I've come across are all the inconsistencies in both the hardware and the software. So let me explain. Let's start with the dials. So one of the thumb dials on the back, there's a nice locking mechanism, just like any other camera. I personally like it because I can just lock it and I know it's safe, it will not turn. I can also leave it unlocked, therefore I can turn it anytime I want. However, the locking mechanism for the main mode dial is different. You have to keep holding it in and then turn. So it's a 2-fingered operation. You can't just flick it from one to the other. I wish they used one system for both of them so that at least muscle memory is no longer an issue, because I find myself trying to operate each one the other way, if that makes sense. The inconsistencies go into the software. So for instance, I can assign a custom button for auto exposure lock, auto white balance lock, but I can assign it as a toggle or a switch. So you can press and hold it and let go, or you can just press it once to activate. For some reason, this doesn't apply to focus. Why? I don't know. Every other camera seems to do it, but this doesn't. So little inconsistencies within software is something that you will come across with the Sony. Another example is if you preview a file when you're in photo mode, the photos, everything looks natural. However, the moment you preview your photos when you're in video mode, they have this really weird color cast, and it's like someone's just turned up the brightness and the saturation to 10 million on this scale. Little things like that. I'm very much nitpicking, I know, but things that I've just come across. The battery life doesn't seem to be the greatest on this camera. If I'm shooting both photo and video, I can probably get half a day out of a full charge. Thankfully, you can recharge the battery very quickly using USB-C, so that's not too big of an issue. And the final negative is regarding the viewfinder. Even though it's the highest resolution and definitely the best viewfinder I've ever used, all of that goes out the window the moment you start focusing. It seems to me that the camera can't process the viewfinder and the focusing at the same time. So the moment you start focusing, the resolution drops to comical levels. It's still, fine. You can still see it's not a problem, but the difference is night and day. Now let me talk about any issues I've encountered. There are only 2 to mention. They're quite small, but again, it's worth talking about. The first one is I had the camera freeze on me. I was switching from photo to video mode, the camera froze, I had to take the battery out, put it back in again, and everything went back to normal. Every single camera that I've owned from every brand has frozen from time to time, so this is not something that I would hold against it, but it's worth mentioning. The second issue actually happened on the A7C, not on the A7R. However, this particular issue is across all Sony cameras from my research, so I'm gonna mention it. I was filming a video just like this one, and for whatever reason, the camera restarted. It didn't overheat, the battery didn't run out, it was just a glitch. However, when it restarted mid-filming, that corrupted the video file. Now, with other cameras like the Fujis, when that happened, there was a protocol in place to kind of close the file so it's not corrupted, whereas with the Sonys it seems not to be the case. Not all is lost. There is a software called Recover It which lets you fix the file, and I've rescued it. It was actually the Fuji X100 6 settings guide. I digress. But yeah, it's something that does happen, so keep that in mind. Now let's talk about some of the things that I like about the camera, and honestly, there's quite a lot, to the point where I'm pretty sure I will get a fanboy or "you've been bought by Sony" type of comment. The first thing is the overall speed of this camera. From switching it on to changing menus, changing modes, going from photo to video, navigating the menus, changing autofocus modes, just the general usability of the camera is the quickest that I've ever encountered. One caveat is I am using the CF Express cards, not the SD cards, and I know that increases the speed, especially when it comes to saving and buffering files. But the overall experience of using the camera in terms of how fast and fluid it is by far the best that I've had, and it means that I can go from taking photos to recording a video instantly. If I see something in the distance and I switch the camera on, I'm not waiting for seconds to actually use it. It's available within half a second. I didn't time it, obviously, but that's just how it feels. The second bonus is how dependable and reliable this camera feels. Now, I did mention about the freeze and the file corruption a minute ago, but overall, in the 2 months that I've used it, anytime I want to switch the camera on, it switches on. Anytime I want to do something, it just does it. Sometimes with cameras, I've had it on like the Hasselblad, for instance, where you will switch it on and it'll switch on very quickly, but then the next time it switches on 3 times as slow. And I've had the same with the Fujis, whereas with this, it's very consistent. You know that it'll take this long to switch on. You know that if you do this, this will happen. So it's quite dependable in that regard. Moving on to the autofocus, I'm not going to bang on about it because it's the best that I've used. I can't see how an autofocus system can get any better. And for me, it has definitely made a huge difference in my photography and video because I no longer need to work around the camera and around any limitations. So whenever I used like the Hasselblad or the Leica or some of the Fuji cameras, you had to take the limitations of the system into account when you were focusing, whereas with this you don't. You just point it and it just works. And for me, that's good. I love how customizable the camera is. It's a whole separate video regarding how I customize and set this camera up. However, just in terms of the sheer options that I have to set this up for me, it's mind-blowing compared to anything else I've used. Just a very, very quick example. I've set up one of these buttons that if I'm shooting an aperture priority, and let's say there's a car coming or something happening and I want to create a motion blur effect. Now, I don't have to mess around with anything. I just press and hold one of the custom buttons. The camera switches from aperture priority to shutter priority. The shutter speed automatically goes to 1/30th, and I get a wider focusing window because obviously I'm doing it in a rush, so I don't have time to just exactly pinpoint and focus. And as long as I keep holding that button, the camera will stay in that mode, and the moment I release, it then reverts back to the mode I was using it in. And this has resulted in more photos because I no longer need to mess with settings to get the shot that I want. On all other brands, you have to choose between an articulating screen, which is great for photography, and if you're behind the camera, or a full flip out screen if you're filming yourself like this, or you have to shoot at particular awkward angles. With the A7RV, I don't have to worry about it because you get both. And the last thing that I like about this camera is the hot shoe. This is completely irrelevant to photographers, but if you like to make videos and you use external mics, you no longer need to use a cable that goes to the side of the camera and sticks out because Sony mics connect to the Sony cameras via the hot shoe. I'd like to take a moment and thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I've been using Squarespace for over 5 years as my online photography portfolio, where I share my best work from all the trips and shoots. Having an online portfolio is important because it's your little corner of the internet that you can arrange however you like. I would also encourage everyone to start an online blog about their photography. Having a blog is the best way for your website to stay relevant on Google because there's fresh content always being uploaded. Not to mention, it's a great way for your website to become more searchable through SEO. Squarespace offers powerful blogging tools that will allow you to publish blogs from anywhere on any device. Squarespace also offers powerful analytics that help you understand where your readers are coming from and what they're searching for. If you're an aspiring photographer, having your own website is important because it will elevate you from everyone else. For a free trial followed by 10% off your first purchase, please use the link in the description or use code RomanFox when you check out. Thank you for Squarespace for sponsoring, and thank you for watching. With all of that out of the way, it's time to wrap this video up, and I just want to talk about a few general observations regarding the Sony camera. So the first one is color. You probably would have heard people saying that Sony colors suck, they're ugly, there's weird color casts, they just don't look very nice. There is a degree of truth to it, but also it's overblown in my opinion. So when you open up the RAW file in Lightroom, it's definitely not the nicest and the most pleasing looking RAW file. The Fuji file or the Canon file, Hasselblad, Leica are more pleasing. The Sony one is a very neutral, very dull and uninspiring file when you first open it, and you do need to edit Sony files a lot more in order to get it to a good place. Does it mean that Sony files can't have nice colors? No. Does it mean that Fuji colors are better than Sony colors? Well, if you take the JPEGs, sure. But if you take two RAW files and then you edit them to the same place, then it's going to look exactly the same. If you like editing, you will like working with Sony files because they give you a lot of room to edit. Well, all RAW files do, but if you don't like editing, then you're probably going to have a tough time with a Sony camera because you have to edit those files to get the most out of them. It's just one of those things. The second observation is regarding how fun or not fun the Sony camera is to use. People seem to have this opinion that they are soulless, they're not fun, they're boring, and all of that. I honestly completely disagree. I genuinely don't understand where that's coming from. The camera is very fun to use, it feels great in the hand, and I thoroughly enjoy the experience of using it. I would go as far as saying that out of all the cameras I own, it's the one that is the most fun for me. And keep that in mind, this is very subjective. You know, like a lot of people love the Leica M bodies and they say it's the most fun photography experience. I would rather use an iPhone than the Leica M camera. I've used it a few times. It was the worst photography experience I've ever had. I can see people unsubscribing, but it is what it is. Whereas the Sony, for me, was very fun. Again, don't listen to other people telling you on the internet what is fun and what is not fun. Try it for yourself. You might hate it, you might like it. It's very subjective, but give it a go before listening to the masses about what is a fun camera and what is not, because it's 100% subjective. The next observation is that this is the only camera I've owned that feels that it gets out of my way and lets me focus on photography. This camera is not about the user experience in terms of how machine polished the back button is, or what material the top plate is made from, or how heavy or how premium it feels in your hand. This camera is about photography and getting out of your way. I don't have to worry about, oh, let me change it to this focus mode because in this focus mode, it's gonna be a bit rubbish, or let me do this, or let me do that. I don't know. It's hard to describe it, but it's the only camera that I truly feel that gets out of my way and lets me focus on the photography. And the final observation is regarding the menu system, which everyone says is too complicated, too cumbersome, and there's no need for a camera to be this complicated. Yes, you will need to set this camera up. It is not a camera that you would buy and use it straight out of the box. Yes, the menu systems are overwhelming, but not in terms of it's hard to navigate. I mean, if you can read, you can navigate, but in terms of there's a lot of different options for you to set up. There's a lot of different little caveats, and if you do this way, this happens, and if you do it that way, that happens. Initially, it's overwhelming. I was overwhelmed, but after some time, you learn how all of these things work, and then you can set up the camera exactly how you want, which for me is a benefit because, as going back to the previous point, it means it just gets out of my way and I never have to go back into the menu system once it's set up, so yeah. Right, the sun is starting to come out, which means I need to grab the camera and head out to shoot. So one more time, thank you for all of your support, whether it's on YouTube, on Instagram, you're reading my blogs, purchasing products, having to sit through sponsored bits. All of that really does help me to keep everything going and keep making more things for you to consume for hopefully many, many more years. So yes, thank you for that. Okay, that's it. I have brain fog and I need to go out. So thank you again, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.